Let us talk about service level indicators and why it's a good idea to add it. Service level indicators are metrics used to measure the performance of a service. They are typically used in the context of a service level agreement, SLAs, which are contracts between a service provider and its customers that define the expected level of service. SLAs are used to track the actual performance of the service against the agreed upon SLA. There are different types of SLIs that can be used to measure performance of a service. Common examples are availability, response time, throughput, error rate. SLIs are important because they provide a way to objectively measure the performance of a service. By tracking SLI over time, service providers can identify trends and make improvements to the service to ensure that it meets the needs of its customer. Here is a sample output using Grafana. And so I'm showing some of the possible graphs that you can create from the metrics emitted by the SLI library. For example, request duration, since it's a histogram, you can bucketize it into different percentiles. Because you can see the status code, you're able to also report on what different response categories are coming in, the 400s, the 500s. The customer resource ID gives you the user information, so you can show the unique users. And this is going to vary based on your service. Sometimes it may be the actual resource that they are pointing to, and sometimes it's just categories, right? It could be business units, things of that nature, or specific regions. So however you decide to measure your users. And then we can see the traffic that is going through the website and the top requests that are coming through. So this is just a sample. You can create various forms of dashboards using the data. The SLI library will emit metrics for each operation to help monitor the service performance, throughput, and success rate over time. The metrics are emitted via standard .NET meter class. By default, a histogram named service level indicator is added to the service meter and used to emit the following attributes. Customer resource ID. It's a value that helps identify the customer resource group or calling service. Location. The location where the service is running. So when you are running for availability reasons, when you run in multiple regions, you can say this is running in West or East US or whichever part of the world that your service is running. Operation is the name of the operation that we are measuring. And activity status code is where you could say, OK, failed. By default, it is unset. And latency is the amount of time that operation took in milliseconds. If you're developing a .NET Core web API, then service level indicators.asp is the NuGet package that you want to take dependency on. By default, it does the right thing for most services. For example, the operation name is set to the HTTP method plus the route. Your activity status code is set to OK, error, or unset based on the HTTP status code. So 200 would be OK range, 500 is error range. And things that are like authorization failure, validation failure, which is neither success or error, will be in unset stage. It also emits the HTTP status code, so that information is available if you want to go specific to what is your status code. Optionally, you can add the HTTP request method, and this dimension will just contain get, post, delete. And this is helpful if you are interested in focusing on just the get methods, and it's an easy way to filter based on the request method. The service level indicator ASP API versioning NuGet package will add API version as one of the dimensions to the metrics emitted by the SLI library. This has to be, for this to work, you have to use API versioning package mentioned in the deck. It's basically the ASP.NET ASP-versioning. So when you use that library, the SLI library is able to extract the API version and emit it. This is the basic setup where the measurement starts from the using block and SLI is emitted on dispose. Based on the success or failure of the operation, set the appropriate activity status code. The default value is unset. In ASP.NET, if the service is set up correctly, then SLI data is emitted for all the routes automatically. When new routes are added, nothing specific to SLI needs to be done. The operation name is based on convention of attribute route info template, and if that information is missing, it falls back to using data from the request. So the rest of the slides are about using this NuGet package in ASP.NET Web App. Next, we need to add a class to configure the SLI library. And this is the basic iConfiguration option setup where we are hooking up the meter of the service and passing it on to the SLI library. Next, we add the service level indicator into dependency injection. Add MVC is required for overrides present in the SLI attributes of your controllers to take effect. And after add MVC, you also have the option to call the enrich callback method, which can be used to set the customer resource ID. For example, if you were setting the alias of the customer, then you could get that information from the HTTP context and set that as the customer resource ID. The next part is to add the service level indicator as a middleware into the ASP MVC pipeline. At this point, you're done, and your service should start emitting SLI. You can look at the full example on my GitHub site, and there's also a Docker container that you can start locally. And if you have that running locally on the Prometheus web UI, you will be able to see the data. If you are using API versioning, then you need to call add API versioning so that API versioning data will be enriched and added as a dimension to the SLI metrics. Now let's look at some of the customization. As I mentioned before, you can add the HTTP method as an option. And if you add that, you're going to get another dimension, which has just get, post, put, delete, so on. If you wish to override the default in operation name, which is the route, you can use the service level indicator attribute and set the operation name to what you want it to be. If the customer resource ID is a parameter to your function, then you can specify an attribute, the customer resource ID attribute, and it'll get emitted. In this example, zip code is going to be emitted as the customer resource ID. But in scenarios where this information may be coming from a header or from an auth token, then it's possible to get the measured operation and directly set the value on it. If you want to do it at a service level, there is the enrich callback method on which you can do the same operation. You could also do it in a middleware. You can add custom attributes as a dimension to SLI by calling add attributes. And you could do this at the method level, in the middleware, or in the enrich callback. When you do it on the middleware, be careful to use a try get method because there may not be SLI information based on how you configure the server. For example, if authorization failed, maybe it never got to the part that adds SLI information. So you don't want it to throw. So use the try method. The other scenarios I've seen is where you pass a bad URL to the server, then the middleware will still get executed, but since it's not a real route, it won't have any SLI information. So in those scenarios that you're not sure, just use the try get method. So this is the link to the repository with source code and samples. I've given the link to both service level indicators as well as the API versioning library. If you have any questions, just reach out to me. That brings us to the end. Hopefully this information was useful to you all. And if you have any suggestions, recommendations, methods, just post on the GitHub site as issues and I can look at them. Thanks. Bye.